and welcome back to the Daily Grace Podcast. I am here with Jeremy Schmucker. Jeremy, welcome to today's conversation.
Thanks.
You'll be seeing a lot more of Jeremy around here. He's going to become a permanent part of the podcast team, which is super, super exciting to all of us who know you and are excited for you to get to connect with our listeners here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thrilled to be able to step into this role.
So today we're recording a really special episode. I don't know if you know this, but the third episode of the Daily Grace podcast, when it started like over 5 years ago, was Kristen telling the Daily Grace story.
I do not remember that far back.
Yeah, but here we are a few years later.
Here we are.
And we're going to hear your perspective on this story. And it's been really meaningful to me to hear the ways that the Lord has worked through y'all's story to make Daily Grace into what it is today. And I'm so excited for other people to hear that. I'm also just excited for them to get to know you as a part of the podcast team. So
Absolutely.
It's going to be a great conversation. Let's start out by just getting to know you, Jeremy. And
Sure.
A lot of times when we bring a guest on the podcast, we start out by having them just describe a typical day in their life, because that helps us connect with you on like the personal level. So typical day in Jeremy's life, what does that look like?
Typical day. So I am a dad, a business owner, and an aspiring athlete like most midlife crisis men. And so I start my morning off with somewhere between a 4 and a 7 mile run. And that is something that has been a joy over the last few years. I used to hate running. For 20 years, I avoided it like the plague. And now it's a huge part of my life. And it's a time really for me and the Lord to just be together. And so it's how I start most of my mornings. Wake up, eat a quick breakfast, go out for a run, come back, and I'm usually helping several of our children either get on a school bus or get to school through a drop-off. And so then they are to school usually by 8 o'clock, and I roll into the office around 8:30. And 8:30 to 4:30 is spending time with lovely people like yourself and all of our other team members that I get to work with. And by 4:30, I am either picking up kids from school or oftentimes from karate, where they do after school program. I kind of help shuttle our middle daughter, Emily, over to gymnastics. She is an aspiring athlete, and of course she wants to be like Simone Biles one day.
Yeah, we're in Houston. I mean, Simone's backyard.
We are in Simone's backyard, and she loves that fact as well, but it's fun to watch her do some gymnastics. And then while she's at the gym, I will either go to the gym, or sometimes I have extra work I need to finish up, or I'll read a book or do something like that. Kristen and I on occasion will take advantage of that and just go out on a date night while Emily's at the gym, and Stella can be at home and babysit Preston. And then I'll come home. We often do dinner as a family. I am the cook in the family because I'm a foodie and I love yummy food. And so Kristen's like, if you want to go ahead and take the lead on that. So I cook, she cleans and saves the leftovers. And then it's bedtime routine with the kids. So like rather boring, rinse and repeat every single day. Mm-hmm. Weekends, of course, look a little different. Saturdays are some sports for kids. Sundays are special time worshiping with the Lord on Sunday. But yeah, that's a typical day in the life of Jeremy Schmucker.
Yeah, I love it. It's very typical, but also very tailored to like you and your family and kind of where you're at in life. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. I also want to get into something that I find really fascinating about you. If you go into your office and you look at the wall, there's a number of diplomas hanging there, way more diplomas than I can credit to my name. And so I'm curious if you can let people know just kind of about your educational history, the various degrees you've pursued. But even beyond that, I just want you to share what has motivated you to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah. When you told me you were going to ask that question, I was like, that's so awkward. I don't need to talk about this, but I can see how it could be helpful, hopefully, for a new audience to be able to connect with a new podcaster. And so thanks for asking. Education's been a really big part of my life because I have struggled with consistency in things for many, many years. I get bored of things easily. And one thing I've found through the joy of formal education is that it just holds me accountable. Mm-hmm. Not everyone needs that. Kristen, for example, my wife, is one that doesn't need that. She can just read and read and read and study and learn. And I am always one that needs a goal or needs some outside force to like push me and hold me accountable. And formal education has kind of helped me in that endeavor. So I was an aspiring musician as a child and actually thought I wanted to be a thespian at one point and go into the theater. and quickly, by God's grace, ran away from that, but pursued music ministry. So I have a bachelor's degree in music ministry. From the age of 16 to about 36, I was either singing in a choir, playing the piano, or leading worship for about 20 years, and really grateful to be in a season where I am worshiping from the pew on Sunday. Yeah. And so it's been refreshing to do that as well. After going through a little bit of music ministry in high school and college, God kind of broke my heart. Actually, one day I can remember reading through Psalm 136, and almost as if I could hear the Lord say, you've been pursuing music and you want to go into music ministry, but there's so much more to ministry than just music. And you have to be able to shepherd people's hearts, and you have to be able to teach God's word. And I had a degree in music. I could tell you what a German sixth chord was, and not to be confused with the French or the Italian sixth chord.
Of course.
But I didn't know very much about God's word, and I didn't know how to help people know God and his word. So I didn't know what to do other than enroll in seminary. So Kristen and I both enrolled in seminary, graduated with a master's in theological studies, and eventually went on to study at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and which is one of the 6 Southern Baptist seminaries, and got my MDiv there before eventually graduating as well from Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with another master's in theological studies. And so it is a few degrees, but more than that, what I always tell people whenever they bring up this conversation is, what does learning look like for you? And there is so much to learn in life. It doesn't just have to be seminary or the Bible, but there's so much to learn, and learning is a gift. Some people could really learn by listening to this podcast, maybe. Other people might learn through reading books, which we hope as a company to be producing for you. And it could also be YouTube. It could be sitting down with a friend. And so I always just encourage people to build a life of learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you're going to bring that to the podcast. This is the second episode we recorded today. And the other one, we were talking about goals, and you talked about how you've read like 100 books this year. And I was thinking, yeah, you've read 100 books, but I've read a handful of those because you came back and recommended them. And so I think you bringing your just hunger for learning and your passion for learning to this podcast is really going to be a great thing for our listeners. And I'm excited for that. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the story of Daily Grace. Can you take us back to almost 12 years ago now, and what was going on in you and Kristen's lives when the Daily Grace Co. was started?
Yeah. So Daily Grace was not a thing. Jeremy and Kristen were in seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and we were expecting our second daughter. Her name is Sophia Kate, and Kristen was about 37 weeks pregnant. And just a couple of days before the arrival of our daughter, the house was ready, the nursery was ready, the walls were painted, all the things. And I fell asleep, like most husbands fall asleep first, I think. And she is struggling to fall asleep. And it was around midnight, where I can still remember, she grabs my arm and she wakes me up. And she just says, I don't think I've felt her move in a while. And I was like, okay, let's go to the hospital. And so went to the hospital, and the nurse that is in the labor and delivery department, she's looking around with the little Doppler machine, and she's like, oh, I think the baby's just hiding. And I mean, in the moment, I think we were too emotional to laugh, but I remember thinking to myself, like, 37 weeks pregnant, babies aren't hiding at 37 weeks. So they go and they got the nurse to roll in the ultrasound machine, the stenographer. And they placed that right on Kristen's stomach and saw the beautiful baby in the ultrasound, Sophia, and can remember standing there looking across the room, and at the top of the machine is where the heart line is. And you normally see the up and the down, and I saw the flat line. And I can remember just falling to my knees and crying and almost arguing with God there in the hospital room, like, why me? Why did this have to happen? And those next 2 days were 2 of the hardest days of our life. Sophia is one of the unique humans that has a death date before her birth date. And she would eventually be born. And she was 6 pounds, 15 ounces, 21 inches long, beautiful head of super thick black hair. If you've seen our other biological children, like Stella has the thickest black hair, and Sophia's was even more thick. It was so beautiful. And so we eventually had to go through the grief journey of saying goodbye, and to her body anyways. And over the next several days, we just learned that grief is hard and that grief is heavy. And we also learned that some of God's children don't know what to say to friends that are hurting. And so we actually kind of felt like we were getting hurt even by people that were meaning well. And so we were like, hey, peace out. We're going to take a vacation. And so we went away for a few days. We drove south to San Antonio. And I honestly can't tell you what we did in San Antonio. I have no recollection of it. But what I do remember is driving up I-35 from San Antonio back to Fort Worth, Texas. And of course, like all interstates in Texas, there were orange cones on the sides because of construction. And I can remember glancing across the car, looking at Kristen, and just making a comment that said, I don't know why we're going through this, but I do know that I don't want it to define us forever. And I want God to use the story. No idea what that meant. And so we get home and Kristen is going through obviously a really tough time. And, you know, if you tuned in last week with us, we were talking about peace under pressure. And I often tell our story about like peace in the midst of pain. And there was real heartbreak and there was real sorrow. And she didn't know why she was going through that, but she just started journaling her heart onto paper. And she would share some of those thoughts on social media. This was kind of before the whole like Bible study and coffee Instagram world that seemed to be really popular in the late 2010s. But she just started sharing with people and her like 300 friends from college on Instagram of what God was teaching her. And people said, hey, I would really enjoy to read what God is teaching you. If you would just like print your journal, I would love to buy a copy. And she was like, no, this is my journal between me and the Lord in my season of grief. And people were like, I think God's doing something really special through you. Would you be willing to print your journal of what God is teaching you? And so she was just going through the book of Philippians where Paul is in shackles and Paul is talking about this peace that passes understanding. And Kristen was learning from the Lord that his peace is sufficient for our greatest struggles. And so we went to the printer and we printed up one copy of this little janky book. And we were broke seminary students and we didn't know what we were doing. We were not a publishing company. There were no editors. There were no graphic designers. There was no warehouse. There was nothing other than a mom whose heart was broken, who loved Jesus. And so we went to Kinko's and we printed up one copy of this book for $13, took a picture of it, and we put it up on Etsy. And we just said to her 300 Instagram friends, if you want to go buy a copy of the journal, here it is. Also, we don't know when we're going to mail it to you because we don't have inventory, but we'll get it to you eventually. And the craziest thing happened that it was like within a few days, several hundreds of people had gone to Etsy and bought this journal. And now we were like, now we have to go figure out how to print it and how to ship it. And so we did that on our kitchen table there in a humble seminary apartment in Fort Worth, Texas. It started off as a little journal from Kristen Schmucker. And for the next several years, that's kind of what it was. It still was heavily like Kristen Schmucker, Daily Grace or the Daily Grace Co., DG. None of that was a thing. It was just a mom that wanted to teach about the goodness of the grace of Jesus, even through some of life's hardest things. And so as the story would go on, we were yet driving down another interstate in rural Pennsylvania this time, a few years later. And I remember us looking at each other again. I don't remember why we were driving. We were driving to Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. Shout out if you know where that is. But we were driving to in this rural area. And we were like, man, we don't want this to be about us. And it felt like Kristen was actually kind of gaining some accolades and people were starting to flock to her and she was gaining a platform. And she just really felt like, that's not what I want. I never signed up to use like my grief story to gain a platform. I really just want people to see Jesus and experience Christ and to know the goodness of his grace. And through another conversation, through some prayer, we realized what we hope people find in her writing is that they find the grace of Jesus on a daily basis. That when they open their Bible, when they open one of her journals, when they open a Bible study or a devotional or whatever it is, that daily that grace of Christ would be evidenced, it would be experienced. And we were like, man, it seems like the business world or the ministry world kind of like really missed the mark here. Why is Daily Grace not even a thing already? Like we have like Our Daily Bread and some other Christian ministries that are out there, but it seems so revolutionary, even though it's not. It's so basic. And so it was from that moment forward that we became the Daily Grace Company and have continued to produce Bible studies ever since then. And I think 12 years later, our goal is that every customer, man, woman, and child in over 70 different countries that we send our products into, that hopefully on a daily basis, they experience that goodness of the grace of Jesus. And so our mission hasn't wavered, but how we do business and how we do ministry certainly has changed a little bit, but our goal is still the same. It's still pointing people to the one who can help you and give you that peace in the midst of pain.
And I think when people hear this story, what connects them so strongly to the mission and to the Bible study, to the journal, to whatever product it is that they're using, is the fact that this came from people who are like, I experienced the grace of Jesus in like the darkest moment of my life. Yeah. And so the fact that you guys have been willing to share that story and have been willing to share it with so many, whether that's the people on our team or the people who are using our resources, has been just such a gift that you've been willing to share your pain and the Lord's faithfulness in it. You said something about how like that's where it started, but it's changed over the years. And I want to get to that like changed over the years part because there's a lot of really cool stories in there too.
A lot of stories.
But first I want to go back to something you said. You said that when you were experiencing grief, people didn't really know how to handle that. And you guys experienced a lot of pain through that. Yeah. So I'm imagining there's people listening who have walked through or are walking through deep grief. Is there anything you'd want to say to them?
Yeah, there's two stories that stick out in my mind. I can remember Kristen, after a mom delivers a child, most hospitals will wheel out the mom on a wheelchair just to be safe. And Kristen was getting wheeled out of the hospital and obviously did not have a child to hold on to. So the hospital was very thoughtful, and they gave her a teddy bear just to hold on to have something to hold on to in that moment. And one of the nurses, she meant well, not realizing that we had just had a stillborn child. And she stood up and started clapping and was like, congratulations. And in that moment, just like our hearts just broke again. There was another instance when we were at church and someone didn't know that we had just delivered a baby and like came up to us and was just like, now remind me what your due date is. Like heartbroken. At the same time, there were other people who did know what we were going through. And you could tell they just felt awkward, and they would come over maybe with a lasagna, the typical church, I'm praying for you casserole. And you could just tell they didn't know what to say. And so for the person who is wanting to minister to a friend, for maybe it's your sister or your mom or your next door neighbor or someone in your small group at church that is going through something really hard. And if you ever find yourself saying, I just don't know what to say to them, take that as a prompt from the Holy Spirit to say less. And so I always tell people there's really only two things you have to say in that moment. One is, I'm here for you. And two is, I'm praying for you. And those words are revolutionary. And if you genuinely mean them, you don't have to say anything else. You don't have to pretend to ask all these weird questions. And so that's always my advice to people. And I've had the privilege of giving that advice on a few occasions. I had a pastor a few years ago when I was in music ministry. Our pastors had a grown child that passed away. And I remember encouraging the entire church, like, we're going to show up to the funeral and we're going to say, I am here for you and I am praying for you. And we're not going to say anything else, because people out of good intentions actually make things worse sometimes. At the same time, if you find yourself in my shoes and you find yourself maybe being the one that is hurt, I've tried, though it's hard over the years, to remind myself that people do mean well, and it's not their fault that they don't understand. They probably haven't been through something like this. And so do your best to just show them grace, because they do care. It just can come out in the worst of ways at times. And so it's one of the unfortunate circumstances of being in difficult situations.
Yeah. That's great advice. That's really helpful. In fact, even as you were talking, I was thinking about someone in my own life who I haven't quite known what to say as they're walking through something hard. And so thank you for sharing that. Okay, let's talk about the early years of Daily Grace.
Yeah.
I would love to know Maybe a story or two of how you saw God's faithfulness in the early years. Also, feel free to share stories about just the chaos of it. I was not there for that time, but over the years, I've heard snippets about it.
You know, one story that sticks out in my mind, these are the stories I wish that even our current team members like could have been there to experience, but there is so much in like a startup, whether it's a ministry, a church plant, or a business, that there's just a lot of hustle involved. And so one of our, probably like year number 3 or 4, it was one of their first times of having a really big Black Friday. And this was, you know, pre-pandemic. So most people are still shopping on actual Black Friday. It seems like the last few years, Friday is now like a month thing.
Yes.
And I don't understand it. But nevertheless, we knew that we wanted to sell Bibles. And it was like, people are already coming to our store for Bible studies, for devotionals. And why not pick up a Bible at the same time? Now, we don't own a Bible translation, so we were sourcing Bibles from other publishers that were already creating the product. And so we were just then selling them on our website. And so we had this big shipment of orders of Bibles that was supposed to be coming in to our house at the time, which was our functioning warehouse. Mind you, there would on an average day be like 50 to 100 boxes on my front porch for the UPS guy to pick up. And I'm pretty sure he hated us, but I was just like, Jesus loves you. And so the Bibles were delayed. The entire logistics industry was having a problem. And Kristen, if you know her, you know that she likes solving problems through creative solutions. And so she was like, where are the Bibles? And we called the dispatch and they were like, yeah, they're an hour and a half away at this huge UPS distribution center. And so in our little white Honda Odyssey van with, I guess we probably had the three biological children at that time. We jumped in, we drove down the interstate an hour and a half to the distribution center. And we pull into the back of their warehouse where it's just the yard is filled with 53-foot tractor trailers and this little Honda White Odyssey that is opening the hatch. And we're like, yeah, we're here for a pallet of Bibles. And I don't know if you've ever been around like big distribution center people, but these people work really hard and they work really fast. And this guy comes out with the pallet of Bibles on his forklift. And I was like, yeah, we'll break it down and just throw the boxes in the trunk. And he was like, no, I'm just going to load it up into your truck. And so with his forklift, he takes the pallet and starts loading it into our back seat of our van. And of course, the pallet corner clips the van and smashes our rear bumper. And he was just like, it's fine, throws it in, closes the hatch, and this guy's on to his next delivery. And there was a part of me in that moment that was like, I need to get your insurance number and, you know, you guys need to pay for this. And then there was another part of me that was trying to even remember the story of Joshua and Moses and crossing the Red Sea and thinking through putting stones of remembrance there of how God's faithfulness had been evidenced. And so we had that minivan for a few years with a busted bumper. And every time I looked at that, I was a little bit low-key mad at the forklift driver. But I also remembered what a joy and a privilege it is to do what we do, to be able to proclaim that goodness of Christ, to be able to teach people the word of God through Bible studies. And that if my bumper got banged up because we were selling Bibles, that I think that's a small price to pay for be able to do work that matters. So that's one of my favorite fun stories that most people don't know.
Yeah, I had never heard that story before. So
yes!
That's a super fun one. Okay, that was like an actual bump like into your car, but you've experienced a lot of other just like bumps along the way of building this business and reaching people and helping them experience the grace of Jesus. Do you have any like struggles you've experienced along the way that someone looking from the outside who maybe just follows us on Instagram or visits our website, they have not really maybe have seen those? Any of those you can share with us?
Yeah, I think kind of building off of that last story about a lot of the early day hustle that things do oftentimes require. And I know that word even has different connotations in our culture, and some people love it and some people hate it. But I think for us, it's just been a reality that to build what God has built here, it does come through his blessing, but also through our hard work. And so for the first 7 years of Daily Grace history, Kristen and I pretty much did not have a single vacation that was just the two of us. Now, there are multiple reasons for that. Part of that was because the business was growing and we had responsibilities. The other part of that was that she was pretty much like pregnant or breastfeeding for about 10 years, it felt like. And so there were various reasons. There were a couple times where we were able to go away, just the two of us, but there would be one child instead of 2 or 3 or 5. And so there was a lot of things like that. But when I look back over those early years, the faithfulness, and really just have to give a lot of, kudos to Kristen for a lot of the hard work that she put in those early days. It was just a year and a half later when our next child, Emily, would have been born after Sophia passed away. And because it was a high risk pregnancy, we had lots of doctor visits, and we didn't have the team that we have today with people like yourself. And we have a team of just about over 50 people now that work on a full-time basis, helping with everything from supply chain to international suppliers to our customer service agents to all of our writers and editors and designers and a finance team and so many other people that are doing things to help our customers. We didn't have that team. And so Kristen would be in the hospital pushing out a baby and answering customer service emails almost at the exact same time. Like literally she was in labor with both Emily and Preston, answering customer service tickets and helping those customers. I think of other times when my father-in-law worked for us and we were working out of our basement at the time. And fun fact, we used to sell candles, hand poured, like organic bougie beeswax candles. And he would wake up at 4 a.m, walk across the street to our house and let himself in, and he would start pouring candles. And there was a lot of just work that went in behind the scenes in order for that to happen. I think of another time when we were living in Costa Rica for 8 weeks when we were adopting our 2 children, and we couldn't have afforded the luxury at that time because, again, we didn't have the team that we have today in order for us to take 8 weeks off of work. And so we're in another country, we're trying to go to immigration, we're meeting with a judge and trying to convince them that we're good parents. And I can remember one of our children, who shall remain nameless, having a meltdown in front of the judge. And I was like, Lord, please let this adoption go through. And Kristen then getting back to our hotel late at night, the children having all these emotions, 2 of the children not speaking our own language, and trying to juggle that, being in a country where the food tastes different to our biological children. So they were getting hangry because they weren't eating well. And Kristen logging into her computer and working on a marketing strategy, working on a sales campaign, helping our customer service tickets go through. And so it's not that it's necessarily been a struggle as much as it's been a lot of hard work. And I say that very almost proudly in a way of the fact that it was a hard work, but I also say it in the sense of Jeremy and Kristen don't mind. We absolutely love it. We wake up excited every single day to go to work, to be able to serve our faithful customers who are excited to meet with Jesus through our products. And so, yeah, there's been struggles, but it's really been through a lot of hard times as well, but it's been worth it for us. We don't regret it.
Yeah. And I love that example that y'all have set for us, because I think there's a lot of people on our team who love hard work, but then on the Daily Grace Co team, we really love hard work, but it is so cool to see what we can accomplish together as a team, with you and Kristen leading the way with your incredible work ethic. So.
We absolutely couldn't do it without our team. And I have to pinch myself on a regular basis when I start to think about the magnitude of where the ministry is at today, to realize over 1 million Bible studies are going out to over 70 different countries. I'm like, that doesn't happen with a team of 3 or 4 people. And it doesn't happen with a team of 50 people who don't care. It happens with our current team because everyone's highly engaged and excited about the mission and shows up to work ready to go. So it's a joy to be able to do this.
Yeah, it really is. We had a meeting yesterday where we were kind of updating on the number of books we've sold this year. And I think it's at 900 and some thousand. But there was this moment we were all just kind of like, whoa, that's a lot of books.
It's a lot of books.
And each one of those impacting someone for Jesus is just an amazing thing to be a part of. Okay, so it's really cool to talk about where we're at today. But then you also mentioned that you started the Daily Grace Co, you and Kristen, at your kitchen table. So very humble beginnings. But that kitchen table holds a lot of significance now. Do you want to fill us in on that?
Yeah, so 2014, We were the two broke and brokenhearted kids that were in seminary, wanting to go into ministry one day, not knowing what that meant, and experiencing the grief of losing a child. And when we had those 500 orders come in, we had to figure out how to ship them out. And so there in our seminary table, we had a computer and a scale and a printer, and we were packaging up anywhere from 10 to 30 orders every single day on our kitchen table. And that kitchen table stayed with us throughout the years. We would move into a new house. I think eventually we ended up upgrading our kitchen table, and we were like, hey, that table would go really well in our basement where my father-in-law is making those candles. And so it became a candle table at one point. And then a few years later, we were like, no, it's a good packing table. And so it'd be where we pack up the orders. And so there's tons of dings on that table. It eventually moved into when we got like our first legit warehouse. It went into the warehouse. It was a packing table. I think at one point it was literally a junk table. We were like, all the books that come banged up from the other forklift drivers in different warehouses before they get to us, banging them up. We're like, just put all the damaged product on this table. And so the table moved around a bunch. Fast forward, I don't remember the exact year. It had to be about 2019. And we had outgrown our 8,000 square foot warehouse at that time. And we were moving about 100 miles south into a 15,000 square foot facility. And my warehouse manager at the time, who still works for us today, I told her, scrap the table. Like, I'm not a very sentimental person. I don't need things. And so I was just like, that thing has seen better days. Get rid of it. And so she did. And the new tenant in that warehouse moved in. And his name was George. And she goes, George, do you want this table? And he was like, sure, whatever. And fast forward a couple days or weeks, I don't remember the exact time, the way that she told me the story. She goes back to George and she says, George, could I get that table back? And he was like, sure, why? And she was like, I just think my friend is going to want it one day. And so this is the part of the story I didn't know for several years. But that table then lived in my friend, her name is Veronica. It lived in Veronica's basement for about the next 5 years. And it just sat there. I have no idea. It probably was another junk table, collected dust. And our company was celebrating 10 years of ministry and 10 years of business just in 2024. And so we were celebrating with our team, threw together a really fancy party. And I see Veronica and a few other team members bring out this really big box of a gift. And I was like, what in the world are they presenting to me and Kristen as a big gift? It's so awkward. Also realizing in that moment, I'm like, did I have to pay for this as the business owner? Like, what are you giving to me that I paid for? And we start unwrapping the gift. And spoiler alert, it was the tabletop. But I'm going to come back to that because in the moment, I actually didn't know that that's what it was. What I saw was inscribed on the table were the lyrics to the old hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. And so before I ever realized that it was the table, I saw those lyrics. And part of the story that I hadn't shared yet was when Sophia was born in 2014, we were blessed with some of the best hospital staff I've ever experienced. They were truly phenomenal, amazing. Several of them were Christian women themselves. And even our doctor, we're actually still Facebook friends with her all these years later. And she's been such a blessing to us. And in that moment, they let us keep the body of Sophia for a few hours to just hug on her and love on her and have those memories. But eventually we had to say goodbye. And so as we laid Sophia down in the bassinet and said goodbye, we started singing the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness, Great is Thy Faithfulness, Great is Thy Faithfulness. And with tears coming down our face, we walked out of that room and went down to the recovery hall of the hospital. And so fast forward 10 years to open some massive box from a friend of mine, not knowing what I was actually looking at, but seeing the lyrics of Great is Thy Faithfulness. I, of course, broke down into tears and started crying. And I can remember Kristen kind of nudging me and she goes, it's the table. And I was like, what table are you even talking about? And she was like, it's the table. It's the kitchen table. And in that moment, I realized Veronica had taken off the legs. So it was just a tabletop. It just looked like a plaque of sorts. But it was the kitchen table that we had bought actually in 2011 from a Target in Pensacola, Florida, that we shoved into a corner as our kitchen table. But it was the kitchen table that we shipped out the very first Joy in Christ devotional from Jeremy Schmucker. And so if you just so happen to be in the Woodlands, Texas, in this area, and swing by our headquarters, and you want to come into our office, you will find the table hanging on the wall, and you will see "Great is thy faithfulness" inscribed on it.
Yeah, it's such a cool story. And it was so special getting to be in the room when y'all saw that table for the first time.
When I was crying like a lunatic.
I do have a video of that.
Gosh.
A very long
Absolutely
video of
not.
that. But it was so special getting to be in the room because several team members shared how your story has impacted them, how their time with Daily Grace has impacted them. And then to see that moment where we were really just celebrating the faithfulness of the Lord in the midst of your story and all he's done since then. So yeah, the table hangs in the office, and it's a great reminder to us on a daily basis of the origin of Daily Grace and also just the Lord's faithfulness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about like the past of Daily Grace. I want to talk a little bit present and a little bit future.
Yeah,
okay?
Let's go.
Presently, every day, we've got people who are coming on our website. They're purchasing a Bible study. They're purchasing a Bible. They're purchasing a mug or highlighters. What is your hope? And I hear you talk about this all the time. And so this is why I want people to hear this. But what is your hope for every single person who purchases one of our products? What do you want them to experience as a result of that?
Yeah. So there's like a business strategy side of this that Kristen and myself and a few other people have sat down, and from a Harvard Business Review perspective, we hope that that strategy is true. There's a theological, practical side that I think in some senses is more true. And I hope that we as leaders have actually welded those two together in a beautiful way. And so we as a company, we have a couple of things that we believe that we do unique to us that hopefully that allow our customers to experience us in a very unique way, perhaps different from other Bible studies that are in the industry or from other similar type companies. We want to be able to stand out and provide a service that's unique to our customers. The one thing that I always come back to for our people is our thing of, will the customer experience Jesus? And I just come back to the earliest days of when we were sitting in that van thinking through, what is the name of this ministry going to be? And it was, we want people to daily experience the grace of Jesus. And so I know you're like, oh, let's talk future and present. And I'm like, it's all connected back to our origin. It's when you go through something hard that you realize, perhaps for the first time, that it is that sacramental, that all sustaining, that sanctifying grace of Christ that is greater than your deepest pain, that the grace of Jesus is stronger than your greatest weakness. It is more powerful than all of the doubts that you have in your life. His grace is better than your worst sin. And so no matter what you are going through, our hope is, whether you buy a necklace on our website, a highlighter, if you email into our customer service agents, if you experience one of our team members in the hallway of our office, if you sit down and crack open a book or a blank journal, our prayer and our hope is that you will experience that beautiful grace of Christ.
Yeah. So internally, I know how much we focus on that and how much effort goes into making sure that someone will, as much as we can, make sure that someone experiences Jesus in one of our products. What's really cool then is when I've had the opportunity to go to events or just talk to someone who's used one of our Bible studies, and a consistent comment that I hear is like, there's just so much Jesus in here.
Yes, come on.
I just love using your products because I can't help but think about Jesus while I'm using them. And so, that's something that only the Lord can do is make that actually happen in someone's life. But you probably don't know if you've ever said that to one of us, that is the most exciting, encouraging thing we could possibly hear.
Yeah. I did a workshop with some of our writers and editors a few months ago, and I remember telling them, all right, every day we have to somehow connect this text to Christ. We have to do it in a faithful way where we're not just making up theology. And I remember also telling them, there's a real possibility that some people might think we talk about Jesus too much, But if we get to heaven, I really don't think Jesus himself is going to say that. And if that's like the worst thing we do as a ministry, then I think we're okay. And I was like, I would rather connect the Bible to Christ too much than potentially never talk about him at all.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Okay, let's talk about your vision for the future of Daily Grace. We're here almost 12 years later, but so many years to go. Yeah. What do you see?
Again, we kind of have like business strategy. That is all the business gurus that tell you how to do things. And there's practical theology. And how do we weld those two together? I hope that 100 years from now, Jeremy and Kristen are never going to be remembered. And I'm like totally okay with that. And in some ways, I think that's even relieving. We don't have to build a legacy for our name. That's actually why we decided not to be Jeremy Schmucker as a famous author. We wanted to be Daily Grace, to point you to Christ. And so 100 years from now, I ask myself as a visionary leader of what do I hope Daily Grace looks like 100 years from now? And I hope that what you've been hearing me say is true today and has been true 12 years ago. My prayer is that that's still true 100 years from now. That 100 years from now, that where we're at in the year of 2126, that a customer will open a Bible study and it will probably look different. Art of the era will look different. The Pantone color of the year will be different. But the beauty of the grace of Christ will still be the same, no matter what that customer is going through. And so that is my theological, practical application. From a business strategy perspective, we really do want to establish ourselves as the leader in the Bible study industry in the world. I think it's safe to say we're probably already in the top 5, arguably top 3. But we want to establish ourselves as number 1. And we have a big, hairy, audacious goal. If you've ever read Jim Collins' books, he calls those BHAGs. We have a BHAG of selling 100 million books because we get really excited thinking about 100 million people that are reading about that beautiful grace of Christ. And so we are only about 5 or 6% of the way to our goal after 12 years of business. So arguably that goal might not be accomplished in my lifetime, though I think it could be. But it's really exciting to think about. Even bigger than our BHAG is our mission statement, which is to teach every person the beauty of Jesus and the truths of Scripture. And so what does it look like for us as a company to actually take that every person part seriously? It is a little overwhelming.
I've been thinking about that so much recently.
I have, even on my morning runs, y'all, it is a time for me, the Lord, and my thoughts. And there are some crazy thoughts that happen. And I start thinking about, what does it actually mean? It's not just a cute little phrase that we put on a card and hand out to our team members. What does it actually mean for 8 billion people to know the name of Jesus and to think that Daily Grace gets to be a part of that? It obviously means Daily Grace can't accomplish that by itself. And so we need to start partnering then with other ministries who are also doing kingdom work. And I'm really proud of the fact that we do that already. We partner with other ministries. We fund mission work in some of the hardest to reaches parts of the world where the missionaries aren't going on a regular basis. We're seeing missionaries go to North India, to Yemen, to Iraq, Afghanistan, so that every person, not just the easy to reach parts of the world, but that every person might know Christ. And so long term, that is a huge, audacious vision, but it's something that excites me to wake up every morning and think that we get to play a tiny part of that.
Yeah, it's so exciting. I love it. Okay. What are you working on right now? Because, well, maybe we should even have you explain this. At Daily Grace, Jeremy, what is it that you do on a daily basis? And what are you working on right now that you're really excited about?
So, fun fact, my music degree is in choral conducting. And I think from a leadership perspective, it's been highly helpful because I was the conductor. I was the person standing up in front of the team of anywhere from 30 to 100 singers and trying to get them to sing as one voice. And in a metaphorical sense, that's kind of what I do at Daily Grace. And so Kristen sets our vision as our CEO, and then it's my job to help implement and integrate that throughout the organization. And so it's looking at our 6 or 7 leaders primarily, and my role is to be the leader of leaders and helping them lead their teams well. So that's the easiest way to explain it. That doesn't give you any nitty gritty. I also think I'm like a professional fire putter outer. And it's just like, oh my goodness, there's everything that comes across my desk that you could possibly imagine. The least fun part about my job is all the compliance that's required. And we file sales tax in all 45 states in like 10 different countries. And it's super annoying, but someone has to do it. And so I get to be involved in some boring stuff like that. But it's even that is like, there's a way to make it fun. And my finance team, we do a good job of trying to make that fun. But outside of even those realms, I am really excited about the fact that I am working on a project right now and writing a Bible study on the book of Hosea. And so Hosea has been one of my favorite books of the Bible for many years. I can still remember being enrolled in seminary for the first time in the year 2009, hearing the Old Testament professor in seminary chapel preach through the book of Hosea. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I had never read the book of Hosea. I obviously had graduated with a Bible degree and never read through the whole book of the whole Bible before. And I remember hearing this love story being preached and was just sitting there in awe of all the Christological implications of Hosea's relationship with Gomer and how that's a reflection of God's love for Israel, which is a reflection of Christ's love for the church, which is me. And to think about what that means to me. And so that book came alive sitting in that chapel all those years ago. And it's a book that I've loved. And so when this came up as a book that Daily Grace wanted to write, I was like, I'm willing to do it if it fits within my schedule. And so it is something I'm currently working on. I'm not done writing quite yet, but it should be any day now. And really hoping that even through that Old Testament narrative, that people might see truly how much Jesus loves them. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that study on Hosea. And I don't know if the listeners know it, but they just got like a big sneak peek into a Bible that's releasing in 2027. That's like secret info that you just shared. So that's pretty exciting. Okay, as we kind of wrap up here and we're just reflecting on the story of Daily Grace, past, present, and future, what's like the one thing that you want the listener to take away?
So my hope is that you would take away actually these words that Kristen wrote in her journal just actually a few days before Sophia passed away. And so jokingly, we've always been like, I don't know how you feel about the gifts of prophecy, but I think the Lord was doing a work in Kristen, even in the days leading up to one of our hardest seasons. And so in Kristen's journal, just a few days before we lost our daughter, Kristen wrote these words. She said, God's ways don't always make sense to our finite minds, but we can always trust that his way is perfect. Help me to follow you no matter what, even when it doesn't make sense. Help me to trust your heart and rest in you, for you are good. And so I don't know what our listeners are going through today. You might be standing on the mountaintop in a really healthy, beautiful, lovely season of life, and we rejoice in that. You might find yourself in a valley today that's really hard. You might feel lonely, stuck in grief or sorrow or pain. And I hope that these words that Kristen wrote that are true based on scripture, that you can trust God. He is good.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. And you know, later this year, in just a few months, Kristen actually has written a book called Daily Grace, How Jesus Answers Our Heartache with Himself. And it is her telling the story of Daily Grace. And I'm sure that some of the stories you shared today will be in there, but also just her personal reflection. And man, I'm sure many people listening have read Kristen's writing and been impacted by it. So we're really, really excited to hear that.
I'm really excited about the book, and I don't think I have permission to tell our audience yet about what is in the appendix of the book, but I will plant a seed by telling people that not only is the book amazing, but there is a special treat that is going to be in the back of the book that if you are a new DG fan or been here for 12 years, that you're going to want to pick it up.
And it's gorgeous. We just saw some of the samples in the office this week, and we're so excited.
I was like, you went for all the colors of gold foil, rose foil, green foil. She was like, give me all the foil.
Yeah.
So she just wanted a book that looked classic and would withstand the test of time.
And it does. Really excited about that. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing the story of Daily Grace from your perspective. It's been really sweet to hear that.
Yeah, it was a joy. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. You can check out the show notes to this episode where we will link. I'd love to link that episode that Kristen did, the third episode of the Daily Grace podcast. Yeah. We'll make sure you know where to find her book. And you can also subscribe to the newsletter there to stay up to date on all things Daily Grace podcast. We'll see you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Good. Boom. I'll have to go through and monetize that episode now.